Have you ever been judged before anyone got to know you? Imagine being mistaken for a problem, only to reveal you're the one who owns the very place where you were pushed aside. What would you do if your worth was hidden behind assumptions? He didn't storm in. He didn't flash money or demand attention. He just walked, quietly, intentionally. A black man, mid-40s, charcoal suit, tailored so sharply it whispered power. No tie, just calm. A watch that could pay off someone's rent, peeking subtly from his cuff. It was 10:02 a.m. when he pushed open the glass doors of the downtown branch. The lobby was quiet until it wasn't. The receptionist's smile flickered. Two tellers exchanged glances. One leaned closer to whisper something. A security guard near the corner adjusted his stance, hand hovering over the radio at his shoulder. This was a man used to being looked at, but not seen, and that's exactly what was happening now. He stepped up to the help desk. "Good morning," he said, voice steady. "I'm here to see the branch manager." That's it. No last name. No reason. He didn't need to explain himself, but they weren't ready for that. The receptionist's voice tightened. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Do you have an account with us?" That's when the guard stepped in. "Sir, can I help you with something?" His tone wasn't helpful. It was suspicious. The man smiled. "Just slightly. I think I already said what I need." And that's when the guard tapped the radio. Within seconds, another officer joined him. Two men now, flanking a customer, in the middle of a bank he legally owns. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." No explanation, no questions, just assumptions. But the man didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch, didn't even blink, because he knew this game. He'd seen it before. He'd lived it before. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see. Was that the man they were trying to escort out? Was the very man who signed the lease on the building they were standing in? He wasn't here to cause trouble. He wasn't here to prove a point. He was here for a routine meeting in a building he owned. But now this was something else. This was about to become a moment they would never forget. He was standing still, composed, centered, unmoved. But the room around him buzzed like a disturbed hive. Phones stopped ringing. Conversations cut short. The bank had gone silent, but not peaceful. "Do you have an appointment?" one of the tellers asked again, voice tighter this time. He looked at her, calm, steady. "Number, I don't need one." To them, that answer didn't compute, because in their world, people like him didn't walk in without permission. They didn't come dressed like power. They didn't speak like they belonged. Another guard stepped in, taller, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "We just want to make sure everything's okay, sir." But the word "sir" was soaked in suspicion, not respect. He kept his tone even. "I said, I'm here to speak with the branch manager. You can let her know Elijah Brooks is here." That name should have meant something. It would have, if anyone had bothered to listen. But they weren't listening. They were profiling. "I think you need to wait outside," the guard said again. "And I think you're making a mistake," Elijah replied. His voice was low but sharp enough to cut steel. He wasn't threatening. He was informing. "There's a difference," the receptionist whispered into a headset, glancing nervously at the escalating scene. A teller picked up a phone, probably calling the manager finally, but the guards were already moving closer. "Sir, let's not make this more difficult than it has to be." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Difficult? He'd been here for 3 minutes. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't stepped out of line. And yet, he was being treated like a criminal. The irony. He used to clean floors in buildings like this. He used to get the side eye while mopping the marble these guards now stood on. And now, years later, those same floors belonged to him. He adjusted his sleeve, checked his watch. "I'll wait right here," he said firmly. "Because when the manager gets here, you're going to realize exactly who you just tried to walk out of his own building." And with that, Elijah Brooks stood still, not just as a man waiting, but as a mirror held up to a broken system. Long before he wore designer suits and owned downtown buildings, Elijah Brooks was just a kid with a dream, in a hustle. Every afternoon after school, he'd set up shop on the corner of this very street, selling bottled water in the summer, candy in the fall. Rain or shine, he was there, 10 toes down, grinding. Not for fun, not for clout, because mama's lights didn't pay themselves, because rent was always due, whether they had it or not. He used to watch the bankers walk by, shoes polished, briefcases swinging, eyes never meeting his. They looked through him like he was invisible, like he didn't belong in their world. But Elijah was never bitter. He was observant. He studied how they moved. He watched which cars they drove, which names they dropped, which floors they got off on. And every time someone tossed him a side eye or muttered, "Go get a real job," he whispered to himself, "One day, I'm not just walking in that bank. I'm walking in as the man they answer to." Fast forward 20 years, and he did just that. Degrees on the wall, business deals sealed, properties under his name, tucked in LLCs most people had never even heard of. See, Elijah didn't chase attention. He chased ownership. He didn't care about being seen. He cared about being in control. And that building, the one with the guards now treating him like a threat, he bought it quietly, under a trust. Let the bank stay as tenants, never flexed, never gloated. But as he stood there, being questioned in the very lobby that once symbolized everything he thought he'd never have, the past came roaring back, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the same story, on a different day. A black man assumed to be a problem before he's ever seen as a person. Only now, the kid on the corner had leveled up, and the people who once looked through him were about to look up to him, because Elijah Brooks wasn't just in the building now. He owned it, and the lesson he was about to teach would echo far beyond these marble floors. Just as one of the guards reached for Elijah's arm, a voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "Wait, what are you doing?" Heads turned. The double doors near the vault burst open, and out came a woman in a navy blue blazer, heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. The branch manager, Olivia Hartman, face flushed, eyes wide, breath caught. The guards froze mid-motion. "Ma'am, this man was refusing to—" But she cut him off with a single wave of her hand. "That man is Mr. Elijah Brooks." Now the room really went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop, or the guard's pride shattering on the floor. Elijah said nothing. He didn't need to. He just stood there, arms folded, watching it all unfold with the calm of a man who'd already won. The manager rushed toward him. "Mr. Brooks, I am so sorry. I had no idea." "I know you didn't," Elijah replied smoothly. "Neither did they." He glanced at the two security guards. They couldn't meet his eyes now. The same men who tried to escort him out were now silently begging not to be fired on the spot. Olivia turned to them, voice shaking. "He owns this building. He's the landlord of this branch." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was historic. The receptionist gasped. One of the tellers dropped a pen. Even the assistant manager who had been watching from behind a glass wall suddenly vanished into a back room, like shame had a physical weight. Elijah adjusted his cufflinks, cool as ever. "I didn't come here for drama," he said. "I came for a meeting. You all turned it into something else." One of the guards tried to speak, voice small. We didn't know." Elijah looked at him, and with that quiet fire in his eyes replied, "That's the problem. You never do." And just like that, the room shifted. What started as a power move by security had become a masterclass in humility, because they hadn't just profiled the wrong man. They profiled the right one at the wrong time. And now, it was too late to take it back. Elijah could have embarrassed them. He had every right to. The guards, the receptionist, the whispers, the stares. He could have made them pay for every ounce of disrespect, but that wasn't who he was. Not today. He turned to Olivia, the branch manager. "I'd still like to proceed with our meeting," he said, calm and measured. "But first," he faced the room, slowly, fully, letting every eye meet his. "I want to say something," Elijah said. And just like that, The lobby became a classroom. I walked into this bank for a conversation, he began. Instead, I was treated like a problem, a threat, a disruption. He scanned the crowd. Nobody moved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't trespass. I asked to speak to the manager, and in return I was surrounded, questioned, almost forced out. The guard stood still, red-faced and rigid. The receptionist stared down at her keyboard, suddenly very interested in the letter Q. This isn't just about me, Elijah continued. It's about how often people like me, people with darker skin, are forced to prove their worth just to be treated like human beings. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It resonated. You looked at me and saw a threat, but what you should have seen was an owner, a client, a leader. He let that breathe. Then he stepped closer to the security guard who first confronted him. You judged me in 3 seconds, but I spent 30 years building everything I walked in here with. Not just money, but dignity, presence, power earned the hard way. Olivia stepped in, her voice tentative. Mr. Brooks, again, we're deeply sorry. This isn't who we are. Elijah raised a hand gently. I believe you want it not to be, but this is exactly who systems like this are, unless they're challenged. And just like that, he walked past the guards, not with anger, but with purpose. Now, he said, turning slightly, let's talk about the lease renewal terms. Because Elijah Brooks wasn't just teaching a lesson, he was setting a new standard. By that afternoon, the story had already started to travel. It wasn't Elijah who told it. It was the whispers. A teller texted a cousin. A receptionist posted something vague on her break. By the time Elijah's meeting ended, a screenshot was already making rounds on social media. A black man just got profiled by security at a downtown bank. Turns out he owns the building. Let that sink in. It didn't take long for the comments to light up. Nah, this can't be real. If this is true, that's wild. What's his name? I need to follow him. That's the kind of power move they never see coming. Within hours, someone linked Elijah's name to the building records. Then came the headlines. Bank security detains property owner in his own building. Elijah Brooks, from side-eye to CEO. Man profiled at bank was actually their landlord. The story spread like wildfire, not because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. Too familiar. This time, though, the ending was different. People flooded his inbox, journalists, business leaders, students, even celebrities reposted the story with the caption, "This is why representation and ownership matters." Meanwhile, back at the bank, things got quiet. The regional director called an emergency meeting. HR launched an internal review. Security was suspended pending investigation. But none of that mattered as much as the mirror Elijah had held up. Because this wasn't just about one bank, it was about all the institutions that make assumptions first and apologies later. It was about how power doesn't always wear a badge or a title. Sometimes it walks in wearing a quiet suit and speaks when it's ready. Elijah didn't ask for fame. He didn't post a rant. He didn't need revenge. The truth was louder than any protest. The receipts were public. The building had his name on it, and his silence carried more weight than their excuses. What they tried to sweep under the rug had become a nationwide spotlight, and Elijah Brooks, he didn't gloat. He just kept moving, because this wasn't about going viral. This was about going forward. A day later, Elijah received a call, not from a friend, not from a business partner, but from the bank's regional director, Cynthia Wallace. Her voice was formal, measured. "We deeply regret what happened at the branch yesterday," she began. "We recognize the errors made by our staff and security. Please accept our sincerest apologies." Elijah listened quietly. He wasn't surprised. Apologies were easy to give. What mattered was what came next. "I appreciate your call, Cynthia," he said, "but an apology isn't enough. Not this time." She paused, waiting. "This incident reflects a larger problem, one that isn't solved by words alone," Elijah continued. "It's about respect, awareness, and changing the culture from the ground up. Cynthia agreed. We're committed to training, to better procedures, to making this right. Elijah's voice was calm but firm. Good, because it needs to be real change, not just PR. He thought about the guards, the receptionists, the managers, people who hadn't meant to harm, but who did anyway. The systemic bias, the assumptions made in milliseconds. Then he made his decision. I will meet with your team, he said, not as the man who was profiled, but as a business owner invested in this community. Together, we'll build a training program, one focused on respect, dignity, and equity. There was silence on the line. Then, that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Elijah hung up. He wasn't here to punish. He was here to transform. Because ownership isn't just about property, it's about owning the responsibility to lead change. To open doors, break down walls, and rewrite old narratives. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Weeks passed, and Elijah Brooks' story didn't fade away. It sparked conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and coffee shops across the city about assumptions, about respect, about what it really means to belong. Elijah himself stood at a podium in a packed community center, speaking not as the man who was profiled, but as a leader demanding change. Ownership, he said, is more than a title on a deed. It's a commitment to uplift, to educate, to build bridges where walls once stood. He spoke of his journey, the kid on the corner, the man in the suit, the owner of the building. But he also spoke of every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. We can't change the past, he said, but we can change the future. And change was already underway. The bank launched new, mandatory training programs inspired by Elijah's vision. Security teams learned to recognize unconscious bias, and more importantly, how to overcome it. The community came together, inspired by one man's courage to turn pain into purpose. Elijah didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he knew the power of owning your story and owning your space. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting back. It's in standing tall and saying, I am here, I belong, and I will make sure the next generation doesn't have to prove it. The lobby where he was once challenged, now a place where respect was the rule, not the exception. And Elijah Brooks, he kept moving forward, not just as a man who owned a building, but as a man who owned the legacy he was creating. This story isn't just about one man's journey. It's a call to see beyond appearances, to challenge assumptions, and to recognize the strength in every person's story. Because true ownership isn't just about buildings. It's about owning your dignity, your voice, and your future.